March 17, 1943, Berlin. The heavy folder slammed onto the polished mahogany desk with such force that coffee sloshed from Admiral Wilhelm Canaris's porcelain cup, spreading dark stains across intelligence reports that could mean execution if the Gestapo ever discovered them. The head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, stared at the documents before him as if they were written in a foreign language. In a sense, they were. The language of American industrial mathematics, a dialect Nazi ideology refused to translate. "Impossible," Canaris muttered, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he lifted the top sheet. "The Americans are feeding us propaganda through turned agents." Through the tall windows of Abwehr headquarters at 76 Tirpitzufer, Canaris could see the Landwehr Canal, where Rosa Luxemburg's body had been dumped 24 years earlier. Now, as chief of German military intelligence, he held in his hands a report that challenged not just Nazi propaganda, but the entire mathematical foundation of German victory. According to intercepted communications and reports from agents still operating in Mexico City and across neutral countries, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant was producing one 4-engine B-24 Liberator bomber every single hour. Let that sink in for a moment. One complete B-24 Liberator, 1.5 million individual parts, 450,000 rivets, 30,000 separate components assembled into an 18-ton aircraft, rolling off an assembly line faster than Germany, could produce a simple military vehicle. Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, standing at attention before Canaris's desk, had triple-checked the intelligence. The numbers remained the same no matter how many times he recalculated them. What neither man knew was that this moment would trigger the most devastating intelligence failure in modern warfare. The systematic inability of German intelligence to comprehend, believe, or effectively communicate the true scale of American industrial capacity to Nazi leadership would doom the Third Reich through a fatal miscalculation of mathematical inevitability. German spies would count every bomber. German leaders would believe none of them, and that disbelief would kill millions. The fatal miscalculation. To understand how German intelligence failed so catastrophically, we need to rewind to 1941, when the seeds of this disaster were already being planted. The collapse of German intelligence regarding American production had begun 2 years earlier, rooted not in poor spycraft, but in something far more dangerous: ideological certainty. In 1941, Luftwaffe General Karl Koller had presented Hermann Göring with reports from military attaché General Friedrich von Böttcher in Washington. These reports stated that American aircraft production was approaching 2,000 planes per month. Göring's response wasn't just dismissive, he literally laughed. According to witnesses present at the meeting, Göring declared that Americans could only build refrigerators and razor blades, not military aircraft. This wasn't mere ignorance, it was a deeply held belief rooted in Nazi racial theory. Americans, with their democracy and what Göring called their mongrel population, simply couldn't match German engineering and discipline. "The Americans are bluffing," Göring told Hitler at the Wolfschanze in December 1941, just 4 days after Pearl Harbor. "Their democracy makes them weak. Their mixed population makes them inefficient. They cannot possibly produce what they claim." Hitler agreed, though his reasoning was slightly different. He believed Germany's 6 years of preparation for war gave them an insurmountable advantage. The Americans, he calculated, would need at least 4 years to mobilize their industry for war. By that time, Germany would control all of Europe and possibly defeat the Soviet Union. The war would be over before American production could matter. Both men were making the same fundamental error. They were confusing their ideology with reality. They believed what they wanted to believe, rather than what the mathematics clearly demonstrated. And German intelligence officers, trained to report facts rather than comfortable lies, were about to discover just how dangerous it was to tell the truth in Nazi Germany. What makes this story so remarkable is that German intelligence wasn't failing to gather information. By March 1943, German intelligence networks across the Americas were reporting something that defied every assumption of Nazi racial theory and economic understanding. The reports came from different sources, different methods, different locations. Mexican industrialists sympathetic to Germany, Spanish diplomats with access to American officials, Swedish businessmen traveling through Detroit, even intercepted letters from American workers to relatives in neutral countries. They all said the same impossible thing. Ford's Willow Run plant alone was producing more heavy bombers than all of Germany's aircraft factories combined. The birth of a monster. To understand why German intelligence couldn't believe what they were seeing, we need to understand what Willow Run actually was. This wasn't just a factory. It was a revolution in manufacturing that would reshape warfare and industrial production forever. The story begins in January 1940, when the Roosevelt administration approached Ford Motor Company with a request, not to build bombers, mind you, just to manufacture components for the B-24 Liberator bomber designed by Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego. Charles Sorensen, Ford's vice president of production and the architect of the company's legendary assembly line techniques, traveled to San Diego to observe Consolidated's operations. What Sorensen saw appalled him from an industrial engineering perspective. Inside the Consolidated plant, he watched men putting together wing sections and portions of the fuselage using methods that would have been familiar to craftsmen building wooden ships a century earlier. Each bomber was essentially custom-built outdoors, under the California sunshine, each one slightly different from the last. The process took 180,000 man-hours per aircraft. Workers swarmed over stationary aircraft, fitting parts that often didn't quite match, requiring constant adjustment and rework. Sorensen spent one night in his hotel room in San Diego, unable to sleep, sketching out an entirely different approach. By 4 in the morning, he had roughed out on Coronado Hotel notepaper a pencil sketch of the floor plan of a bomber plant unlike anything the world had ever seen. It would be 1 mile long and 1/4 mile wide, the biggest single industrial building ever constructed. That sketch, later initialed by Edsel Ford and his sons, became the true outline of Willow Run. But Sorensen's idea was revolutionary in more ways than just size. He envisioned breaking the B-24 down into essential units, creating separate production layouts for each unit, then delivering each unit in its proper sequence to a moving assembly line. The bomber wouldn't stay still while workers swarmed over it. Instead, the bomber would move past stationary workers, each performing specific tasks repeatedly, achieving perfection through repetition. It was the same principle Ford had used for automobiles, but nobody had ever attempted it for something as complex as a 4-engine heavy bomber. The skeptics were immediate and vocal. Consolidated Aircraft mocked the idea. "You can't build planes like cars," they declared. The complexity was simply too great. The precision required was beyond mass production techniques. Every aviation expert knew that aircraft manufacturing required skilled craftsmen who understood the entire plane, not assembly line workers doing repetitive tasks. But Sorensen knew something the aviation experts didn't. The principles of mass production weren't limited by complexity, they were scalable. Yes, comparing a Ford V8 automobile to a 4-engine Liberator bomber was like matching a garage with a skyscraper. But despite their vast differences, Sorensen knew the same fundamentals applied to high-volume production of both. First, break the product's design into essential units, make separate production layouts for each unit, build as many units as required, then deliver each unit in its proper sequence to the assembly line to create one complete finished product. Construction of Willow Run began in March 1941. The main building went up in sections, with workers using plywood partitions to seal off finished portions from those still under construction. 5 main contractors worked simultaneously to speed the project. The plant was formally dedicated on October 22, 1941, in a ceremony attended by Major Jimmy Doolittle of the United States Army Air Forces. Ultimately, more than 7 million square feet of floor space were completed. But that's not counting the adjacent airport Ford constructed, with its 1,484 acres, 6 runways, and 3 massive aircraft hangars. The largest hangar could house 20 B-24s at once, and included a control tower, a cafe, and a hotel. The plant was so vast that weather formed inside it. Workers reported clouds forming near the ceiling, and on humid days it sometimes rained inside the factory. The building stretched so far that Ford installed a unique 90-degree turn in the assembly line to avoid crossing county boundaries, which would have doubled their property taxes. These tax turns, as workers called them, became legendary. Massive turntables rotated partially assembled liberators so that output could continue unabated. The revolution in production. What Sorensen accomplished at Willow Run wasn't just impressive engineering. It was a complete reimagining of what mass production could achieve. The key was breaking the bomber down not into major sections, but into 60,000 separate operations. 60,000. Each worker would perform the same task over and over. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her children now installed hydraulic lines in the tail section. They trained workers in days, not months. Repetition bred expertise faster than any traditional apprenticeship. The assembly line itself was a marvel of choreographed complexity. Imagine a mile-long ballet where every dancer knows exactly where to be and what to do at precisely the right moment. Wings arrived from one direction, their internal structures already complete with wiring, hydraulic lines, and fuel systems. Fuselages came from another direction, already fitted with bulkheads and longerons. Tail assemblies arrived from a third. They met at precise points along the line, where teams of workers had mere minutes to join them together before the whole assembly moved to the next station. Ford built an apprentice school that trained 8,000 workers weekly. Think about that number. 8,000 people every single week learned to perform highly specialized tasks on one of the most complex machines ever created. These weren't experienced aircraft workers. Many had never worked in any factory before. Some couldn't even read blueprints. But through Ford's training methods and the genius of breaking complex tasks into simple, repeatable operations, they became expert at their specific jobs within days. The workforce itself demolished Nazi racial theories. Women comprised 40% of Willow Run's workers. They weren't just doing light work either. Women operated sophisticated machinery, performed precision riveting, installed complex electrical systems, and managed supply logistics. Rose Will Monroe, who would become the inspiration for the famous Rosie the Riveter icon, operated a rivet gun on the B-24 production line with such skill that she trained others. Her smaller hands could reach into tight spaces larger men couldn't access. Her patience for repetitive tasks often exceeded that of male workers. African Americans made up 9% of the workforce, operating the same sophisticated machinery, making the same wages, performing the same critical tasks as everyone else. 3,800 African American workers, in a time when segregation still ruled much of America, were proving through their daily work that Nazi theories about racial hierarchies were not just morally bankrupt, but factually false. Even disabled workers found meaningful employment. 1,200 workers with various disabilities, 3% of the workforce, performed jobs that utilized their abilities rather than focusing on their limitations. Little people climbed inside wing assemblies to hold parts in place during riveting. Workers with mobility limitations operated stationary machines that required precision rather than movement. The production process itself was a thing of beauty for anyone who understands manufacturing. The center wing assembly became the backbone of the entire operation. This was the crucial structural component that joined the two wings and held all four engines. Workers put the parts in the wing. Riveters knocked the wing parts together with pneumatic guns whose staccato rhythm became the soundtrack of American democracy in action. Then, the center wing assembly was sent to a multiple-function machine that completed 42 precision machining operations accurate to within 2/10,000ths of an inch in just 17 minutes. Sub-assemblies converged like tributaries flowing into a mighty river. The nose section, complete with the Norden bomb sight, navigation equipment, and the bombardier station. The cockpit section with all instruments, controls, and the flight deck. The bomb bays, capable of holding 8,000 pounds of ordnance. The tail section with its gun turrets and control surfaces, each arrived at exactly the right moment, was joined to the main assembly, and the growing bomber moved forward. By April 1944, Willow Run achieved something that seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. In that single month, employees working 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days a week, produced 453 airplanes in 468 hours. That's one finished B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Charles Sorensen's brash promise of one plane every hour was no longer an empty boast. It was statistical reality. The spies who knew while Ford was achieving the impossible, German intelligence was working overtime to document it. And here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. German intelligence wasn't incompetent. They were actually quite good at gathering information. The Abwehr had established extensive networks across the Americas, and these networks were feeding back detailed, accurate intelligence about American production. Oberstleutnant Nicholas Ritter, head of the Abwehr's Air Intelligence Section, had spent 10 years living in America before the war. His apartment in Manhattan during the 1920s had overlooked the construction of the Chrysler Building. He had watched Americans erect the world's tallest building in less than 2 years, using techniques that would have seemed impossible to European engineers. When Ritter analyzed the intelligence coming from Willow Run, he understood something that Goering and Hitler refused to accept. If these numbers are correct, Ritter reported to Canaris, and I believe they are, then Germany has already lost the war. It is now only a question of mathematics and time. The intelligence came through tortuous routes, each more dangerous than the last. Georg Nicholas, running the Abwehr's primary network in Mexico City, had cultivated sources among American businessmen who traveled freely between Detroit and Mexico's oil fields. These men spoke casually of miracles they had witnessed, unaware their dinner conversations were being transcribed by German agents. On February 3, 1943, American oil executive Harold Morrison attended a reception at the German-Mexican Commerce Association in Mexico City. After several tequilas, Morrison began describing his recent tour of the Willow Run facility, arranged by Ford to showcase the company's capabilities to potential investors. "Gentlemen," Morrison said, unaware that Wolfgang Blau, a German agent posing as an Argentine leather merchant, was memorizing every word, "what I saw defies description. The assembly line is over a mile long. The building is so vast that clouds form inside it, and it sometimes rains within the factory. They have 42,000 workers, including thousands of women, including Negro women, building the most complex machine ever created." Morrison pulled out a pencil and began sketching on a napkin. "The bomber has 2 bomb bays, each holding 4,000 pounds of ordnance. 4 engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower. They produce them in sections, sub-assemblies Ford calls them, that converge like rivers flowing into the sea." Blau asked, trying to sound casually interested. "But surely such complexity means frequent breakdowns, production delays?" Morrison laughed. "That's what Consolidated Aircraft thought. They mocked Ford, said you can't build planes like cars. But Ford broke the bomber down into 60,000 separate operations. Each worker performs the same task over and over. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her children now installs hydraulic lines in the tail section. They train them in days, not months." Perhaps the most detailed intelligence came through Francisco Franco's Spain. Colonel José Ungría, Spanish military attaché in Washington, maintained close relationships with American aircraft manufacturers while secretly providing intelligence to Germany in exchange for tungsten shipments crucial to Spanish industry. In March 1943, Ungría attended a reception at the Argentine embassy, where he met Charles Sorensen himself, Ford's production chief and the architect of Willow Run. Sorensen, believing he was speaking to a representative of a neutral nation that might purchase aircraft after the war, spoke freely about the plant's capabilities. "When I first visited Consolidated's San Diego plant in 1940, Sorensen told Ungría, they were building B-24s outdoors in the sunshine, each one different from the last, taking 180,000 man-hours per aircraft. I knew we could do better." Ungría pressed for details, claiming professional interest as a military engineer. Sorensen, proud of his achievement, obliged. "I spent one night in my hotel room in San Diego sketching out the entire production flow. We would build bombers like we build cars, not by having workers swarm over a stationary aircraft, but by moving the aircraft past stationary workers. Each worker would perform specific tasks repeatedly, achieving perfection through repetition. The Spaniard asked about the workforce challenges of such complexity. "We built an apprentice school that trains 8,000 workers weekly," Sorensen replied. "Women comprise 40% of our workforce. They're actually better at detailed work. Smaller hands for tight spaces, more patience for repetitive tasks. We have Negro workers operating sophisticated machinery. We have boys of 16 managing supply logistics. Democracy means utilizing all available human resources." Through Swedish, Argentine, Japanese, and Turkish channels, German intelligence received consistent reports confirming Willow Run's production rate. Swedish engineer Erik Lundberg visited the plant in March 1943 and reported the plant operated with efficiency that defied European understanding. They used 1,600 specialized machine tools, many designed for single operations. The capital investment was staggering, perhaps $200 million for tooling alone. Japanese Commander Toshikazu Omine's coded message to Tokyo, intercepted by German intelligence, provided independent verification. "This single factory produces more aircraft monthly than entire Japanese aviation industry." Even more dramatic was Operation Pastorius, Germany's attempt to insert saboteurs into the United States via submarine. George John Dash, leader of one of the two four-man teams, had lived in America for 20 years before returning to Germany in 1939. His secret orders from Canaris were to gather intelligence on aircraft production before conducting any sabotage operations. In the early morning hours of June 13, 1942, Dash's team landed at Amagansett, Long Island, having come ashore from U-202 just after midnight. Within days, tormented by the implications of his mission and what he already knew about American capacity, Dash surrendered to the FBI. During his interrogation, Dash revealed something that stunned his American captives. "Canaris himself told me that Berlin doesn't believe your production figures. They think Willow Run is propaganda. He wanted photographs, employee counts, shipping records, proof that would force Göring to accept reality." FBI Special Agent Charles Landman asked incredulously, "They don't believe we're producing a bomber an hour?" Dash laughed bitterly. "Agent Landman, I lived here. I've seen your automobile factories. I tried to tell them that if Ford could produce a car every minute before the war, they could certainly produce a bomber every hour during it. They accused me of being defeatist." The leadership's delusion. By April 1943, German intelligence had assembled comprehensive data from 17 independent sources, all confirming the production rate. The numbers were staggering and consistent. Willow Run alone was producing 650 B-24s monthly at peak, with the entire American B-24 production exceeding 1,400 monthly across all factories. On April 20, 1943, Hitler's 54th birthday, Canaris personally presented the intelligence to Göring at Karenhall, the Reichsmarshal's ostentatious hunting estate north of Berlin. The meeting would become legendary among German intelligence officers for Göring's complete rejection of reality. Canaris brought photographs taken by Spanish diplomats, intercepted shipping manifests showing aluminum consumption, reports from dozens of sources. He spread them across Göring's massive oak table like a dealer, showing cards that would lose the game. "Herr Reichsmarschall," Canaris began carefully, "we have confirmation from 17 independent sources. The Ford Willow Run plant is producing one B-24 Liberator every hour at peak production. They achieved this rate consistently since January." Göring, weighing over 280 pounds by this point in the war, picked up one of the photographs showing the assembly line stretching into the distance. "Canaris," Göring said with contempt, "do you take me for a fool? These are obviously wooden mock-ups, props for propaganda. The Americans want us to believe they can build aircraft like sausages. This Willow Run plant probably produces 50 bombers monthly at most." Canaris pulled out another document, an intercepted manifest from the Pennsylvania Railroad showing aluminum shipments. "Herr Reichsmarschall, they're consuming 16 million pounds of aluminum monthly at this one plant. That's more than our entire monthly production." Göring laughed harshly. "Then where do they get this aluminum? From their Negro workers? From their women riveters? "Canaris, you've been deceived by American propaganda." The dismissal wasn't just Göring's arrogance, it was systematic. A week later, Canaris was summoned to the Wolfschanze to brief Hitler personally. The meeting included Generals Jodl and Keitel and Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels. Hitler, studying maps of the Eastern Front, where the Wehrmacht was preparing for Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk, listened impatiently as Canaris presented the intelligence. "Mein Führer," Canaris said, knowing he was risking his life. "If the Americans are producing 1,400 B-24s monthly, plus equal numbers of B-17s, plus their fighter aircraft, plus British production, the aerial bombardment of the Reich will soon exceed our defensive capabilities." Hitler's response was characteristic. "Admiral, the Americans are capable of mass production of simple goods, automobiles, refrigerators, but a bomber is not a car. It requires precision, skill, dedication. When it took us 6 years to prepare for war, they claim to have achieved this in 16 months. It's impossible." General Jodl studied Canaris's figures and began making calculations. "Even if we accept 1/4 of these figures as accurate." "The figures are false," Hitler interrupted. "The Americans entered the war in December 1941. Building this miraculous factory and achieving this production in such time is impossible." What makes this rejection even more tragic is that Canaris had obtained actual film footage of Willow Run in operation through American intelligence contacts in Switzerland. The film, smuggled via Spanish diplomatic pouches, showed 5 minutes of the assembly line in full operation. Canaris and his deputy Hans Oster watched the film in a locked room in Abwehr headquarters. The camera traveled along the entire mile-long assembly line. B-24s in every stage of construction moved past at steady pace. Workers, men and women, black and white, performed tasks with mechanical precision. A clock visible in several shots confirmed the timing. 1 bomber every hour. "My God," Oster whispered. "It's true." Canaris took the film and lit it with his cigarette lighter, watching it burn. "We cannot show this to them," he said quietly. "They would accuse us of creating fake footage or being traitors." In November 1943, German intelligence obtained aerial photographs of Willow Run, taken by Spanish diplomats. Photo analysts spent weeks studying the images. Their conclusions were devastating. Parking lots contained approximately 12,000 cars, indicating 3-shift operations. Completed B-24s were visible at the adjacent airfield, 47 aircraft ready for delivery. The assembly line was visible through skylights. Aircraft were spaced exactly as reported. Rail siding showed dozens of freight cars delivering materials. Hedman Vernard, the photo analysis chief, wrote a report that would never reach decision-makers. Photographic evidence confirms human intelligence. Production rate appears accurate. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment. Göring, shown the photographs, dismissed them as clever American photographic manipulation, probably using scale models. The technocrat's secret despair, Dr. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and the only Nazi leader with genuine understanding of industrial production, secretly obtained the American intelligence. Speer, unlike Göring and Hitler, understood what he was seeing. His background as an architect and his recent experience modernizing German production gave him the knowledge to recognize the truth. His diary entry for May 15, 1943, discovered after the war, reveals his despair. "If the Willow Run figures are even half accurate, we face not defeat but annihilation. They produce more aircraft in a month than we do in a year. But I cannot speak this truth. To do so would be my death warrant." Speer was right to be afraid. To accept that Ford could produce a bomber every hour was to accept that the entire Nazi worldview was wrong. That democracy wasn't weak, but strong. That racial mixing didn't create weakness, but strength. That women could do men's work. That black workers were just as capable as white workers. That Jewish scientists hadn't weakened America, but strengthened it. Every foundational belief of Nazi ideology was being demolished by the simple mathematical reality of Willow Run's production. On Christmas Eve 1943, Canaris received intelligence showing American production projections for 1944. The numbers were staggering. B-24 Liberators, 18,000. B-17 Flying Fortresses, 12,000. B-29 Super Fortresses, 1,000. Fighter aircraft, 40,000. Total, 86,000 aircraft in a single year. Hitler's response when presented, these figures captured the complete disconnect from reality. The Americans claim they will produce more aircraft in 1944 than all nations have produced in all of history. It's absurd. But it wasn't absurd. It was happening, and German pilots were about to discover just how real those production numbers were. The human cost of truth. By February 1944, Canaris was removed from his position, suspected of defeatism and treason. His replacement, Walter Schellenberg, was a Nazi loyalist who wouldn't dare contradict Hitler or Göring. But reality couldn't be ignored forever. On February 20th, 1944, during what became known as Big Week, the American 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, sending over 1,000 heavy bombers against German aircraft factories. In 6 days, they dropped more bomb tonnage than the Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire Blitz. Luftwaffe fighter pilot Adolf Galland told Göring, "Herr Reichsmarschall, I've counted over 800 bombers in a single formation. These planes are real, and they're dropping real bombs." On June 6, 1944, D-Day, over 11,000 Allied aircraft appeared over France. The Luftwaffe could muster fewer than 300 fighters in response. Feldmarschall Hugo Sperle sent a desperate message to Berlin. "The enemy's aerial superiority is absolute. Our intelligence was correct. We were deceived not by the Americans, but by ourselves." The German intelligence officers who tried to report the truth paid a heavy price. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was executed on April 9, 1945, at Flossenbürg concentration camp, just weeks before the war ended. Hans Oster, his deputy, was executed the same day. Alexis von Roene was executed in October 1944 for involvement in the July 20th plot against Hitler. Hans Bernd Gisevius escaped to Switzerland and survived the war. After the war, surviving German intelligence officers revealed the full scope of the failure. Walter Schellenberg testified at Nuremberg, "We knew the truth about American production by early 1943. Every professional intelligence officer understood the numbers were accurate. But to report this truth was to risk execution for defeatism." Hans Bernd Gisevius wrote in his memoirs, "The tragedy was not that we lacked intelligence about American production. We were drowning in it. The tragedy was that our leadership refused to believe it because it contradicted their racial ideology." The mathematics of defeat. The final numbers tell the story that Nazi leadership refused to hear. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted after the war, confirmed what German intelligence had reported. Willow Run produced 8,685 B-24s between 1942 and 1945. Peak production was 650 aircraft monthly. The hourly rate of one bomber every 63 minutes was sustained for months. The total cost per aircraft dropped from $238,000 to $137,000 as production scaled up. But Willow Run was just one plant. The total American production told an even more staggering story. Total B-24s produced 18,188. Willow Run built almost half of them. Total B-17s produced 12,731. Total American aircraft produced from 1940 to 1945. 333,717 aircraft. Germany, fighting a single-front war until 1941, then a two-front war, produced 94,700 aircraft in the same period. The United States produced 3.2 times more aircraft than Germany while fighting a two-ocean war, supplying Britain and the Soviet Union, and building the atomic bomb. Albert Speer, in post-war interrogation, was asked why Germany didn't believe the intelligence about American production. His answer cuts to the heart of the tragedy. To accept that Ford could produce a bomber every hour was to accept that our entire worldview was wrong. That democracy wasn't weak, but strong. That racial mixing didn't create weakness, but strength. That women could do men's work. It would mean accepting that we had started a war we could never win. Who would tell Hitler that? Democracy's assembly line, Rose Will Monroe, the real-life inspiration for Rosie the Riveter, operated a rivet gun on the B-24 production line. She and thousands of women like her had never worked in industry before Pearl Harbor. In a 1984 interview, Monroe captured the essence of what Willow Run represented. "We knew we were building something important," Monroe said. "Every rivet we drove was going to help end the war. We worked double shifts sometimes, sleeping in the parking lot between shifts. We had brothers, husbands, sweethearts flying these planes. We weren't going to let them down." The workforce demographics at Willow Run would have shattered Nazi racial ideology completely. At peak production in April 1944, the plant employed 42,331 workers. Of these, 11,000 were women, 26% of the workforce. 3,800 were African Americans, 9% of the workforce. 1,200 were disabled workers, 3% of the workforce. These inferior workers, according to Nazi theory, were outproducing the German master race by orders of magnitude. Every bomber that rolled off the Willow Run line was proof that Nazi ideology was not just morally bankrupt, but mathematically false. Democracy worked, diversity strengthened, freedom produced. The failure to believe intelligence about Willow Run had catastrophic consequences that went far beyond military defeat. Resources were wasted on wonder weapons like the V-2 rocket instead of practical defenses. Operations were planned for facing hundreds of bombers, not thousands. Peace overtures were delayed because Nazi leadership didn't understand certain defeat was inevitable. When reality could no longer be denied. At the 1985 dedication of the Yankee Air Museum at Willow Run, former Rosie the Riveter Rose Will Monroe met former Luftwaffe pilot Hans Rudel. The encounter captured the entire tragedy in a brief conversation. Rudel asked, "How did you build so many so fast?" Monroe answered simply, "Honey, we just went to work every day and did our job. Nothing fancy, just punch in, build bombers, punch out. Democracy isn't complicated. It's just free people doing their best." Rudel responded, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "We were told democracy made you weak, that your diversity made you inefficient. We were told lies, and those lies killed millions." In the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, American intelligence officers discovered a final German intelligence report on Willow Run, dated April 20, 1945, Hitler's last birthday. The report was never delivered. By then, Hitler was in his bunker, and the 1,000-year Reich had days to live. The report read, "Willow Run production confirmed. We reported this truth 2 years ago. We were not believed. Germany dies not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of wisdom, to believe intelligence that contradicts what we wish to be true. Let future generations learn. Reality does not bend to ideology. Mathematics does not yield to mythology. Truth ignored becomes tragedy." By war's end, thousands of American bombers, many built at Willow Run, delivered the final argument German intelligence had tried to make 2 years earlier. Lessons for our time. The story of Willow Run and German intelligence carries profound lessons that echo across decades. Cognitive bias can cause even intelligent people to reject accurate intelligence if it contradicts core beliefs. Ideological blindness can override mathematical reality with catastrophic consequences. Intelligence systems that punish unwelcome truth will receive only comfortable lies. Underestimating opponents based on prejudice leads to fatal miscalculations. German economists, analyzing captured documents after the war, finally understood the true scale. Willow Run cost $200 million to build. Germany's entire aircraft industry investment from 1933 to 1945 was equivalent to $400 million. Willow Run's floor space, 3.5 million square feet. All German aircraft factories combined, 8 million square feet. Willow Run's electrical consumption, 2.5 million kilowatt-hours monthly. The Americans had built a single factory, consuming more resources than entire German cities. The verdict of history is clear. German intelligence was excellent at gathering information. Their spy networks were extensive, their analysis was often accurate, their reporting was detailed. German intelligence acceptance was catastrophic. Leadership refused to believe intelligence that contradicted their worldview, with consequences that killed millions and destroyed their nation. In that failure to believe uncomfortable truths lies a warning for all nations, for all times. Reality doesn't care what you believe. Those who deny reality in favor of ideology will ultimately be destroyed by it. Willow Run built more than bombers. It built proof that democracy works, that diversity strengthens, that freedom produces. German spies counted them all, bomber after bomber rolling off that mile-long assembly line. German leaders believed none of it, and that disbelief killed the Third Reich as surely as any bomb that fell from those B-24 liberators, built by free people in a factory, where democracy proved stronger than fascism, where mathematics overcame mythology, where truth ultimately triumphed over lies. One bomber every 63 minutes. 1.5 million parts assembled by women who'd been homemakers, by African Americans who weren't supposed to be capable, by disabled workers who weren't supposed to contribute, by teenagers who weren't supposed to manage complex logistics. All of them proving that when you judge people by their ability rather than their race, their gender, or their background, when you give free people the tools and training to succeed, there's no limit to what they can achieve. That was the lesson Nazi Germany refused to learn. That was the truth their spies reported and their leaders rejected, and that rejection cost them everything. If you found this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. History has so many more incredible stories to tell, and I'll be here to share them with you. Until next time, remember, the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient.